Thanks for sticking it out, everybody. This has been great for me to hear a lot of these stories. You know, I did come with some prepared questions. I had some ideas, but I'm learning a lot along the way, so I hope you are. I am here with Kuba Sendor, who is engineering manager for corporate infrastructure security at Yelp. So if you've noticed a common theme, a lot of the practitioners that we have here have responsibilities in infrastructure and responsibilities in security. And a lot of those things are starting to overlap more. So being responsible for both infrastructure and security at a company of Yelp's size and posture, tell us a little bit about your team role and some of the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis.
Sure, yeah. So actually a couple of us here are mainly around. So our main role is to basically make sure that Yelp stays secure as big company, sort of abstracting away from what we're doing as a business. So definitely something that's probably similar across all of big companies, 5,000 plus employees, all of the headaches related to that, people trying to work from home, trying to work from different offices across the world, trying to work from their mobile phones. So definitely issues related to access to the internal infrastructure, as well as everything that's coming from the outside, so phishing, malware, that's what we're working on, analyzing on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah, we first met because we were both speaking at a Bay Area cybersecurity meetup probably about six months ago, maybe even a little bit longer. And those were some of the challenges that you were facing then. How's that been going in the last, I guess, since we last spoke?
Yeah. I would say, definitely at the stage I was presenting 6 months ago, we already were past this initial step of sort of automating lots of internal processes that we have related to initial triage, analysis, and then providing remediation. So that was already sort of there. I think what we are getting better at over the past few months, especially with sort of new people we have on the team, is incident response and sort of this regular exercises, tabletops, and being prepared for the kind of threats that we don't really, we didn't have before, or not necessarily something that we are, either good at or well-documented instructions, playbooks around how to respond to. So something that we'll have to probably assemble a team ad hoc and try to resolve it as the incident is occurring.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with a pretty wide, attack surface, a variety of threats coming from a lot of locations, and you kind of mentioned, a company of your size with more, remote employees, you got more mobile devices. What are the things that you see from like architectural perspective? And this is a lot of what led to Google going out beyond corporate out is these kind of more distributed environments. How do you see the perimeter kind of breaking down, traditional perimeter security breaking down when you have those environments?
Yeah, so I think the most interesting challenge there is that obviously we're talking a lot about productivity here. So what productivity probably boils down to for a lot of people is actually looking for new tools and new services, new shiny toys that will help them to sort of work more efficiently and finish the tasks faster. So what they'll usually do, they'll come up to us and ask hey, can we use this thing? And it's okay, sure, here just 10 pages, just fill it up, we'll go over it. So, and this is sort of the initial step, right? The sort of discussions we're having about bringing something new in. The sort of bigger headache is already with something what we have in our landscape today, and sort of moving forward, the existing tools, the new tools that are coming in, how we sort of structure the access control mechanisms for them, and how do we also audit the access, implement any specific changes related to sort of people coming and going, changing the roles within the company, and so on.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And I know the VPNs are a common pain point for you. What are the things that you're running into that are really challenging? Productivity and security perspective.
Yeah. I think the problem that we have right now when it comes to VPN is that it's really wild west. So we can even pull up your mobile phone and VPN in, and you have access to the whole network from the device that I just bought 10 minutes ago, right?
Right.
From someone on the street.
Ooh, where? I need one. No, I'm just kidding.
So the big problem there is that people are using different kind of devices coming from different places, vendors, personal devices, someone's like partner work device, so something totally different with a lot of, liability, I would say,
Right.
when it comes to that. So this is sort of like the biggest headache we have right now, like trying to understand what the use cases are and where it makes sense, provide some alternatives. So rather than, just use VPN to access Jira, like let's make sure that Jira is accessible from your mobile phone in the first place without the need to get access to everything, which VPN basically is, right?
Good. No, I mean that's a good approach, is to kind of think of it from a use case perspective. Maybe pick a few resources, and I think Ryan mentioned it from Quid, is that you can kind of do these things side by side, and then just kind of continue to just kind of step evolve until you have the feel comfortable with things, and then unplug that VPN. That's the last thing you do, but you want to build in all the right controls, and doing that from like a use case perspective is the right way to do that. So, you've got a lot of moving parts. You've got a big cloud infrastructure. You've got a lot of different employees. What would the implications potentially be from, let's say, eliminating the VPN into more like BeyondCorp style kind of access controls, where the resources themselves are kind of on this public internet, but you're implementing these different controls. What might that mean for you, for like an infrastructure and security perspective, especially when you have so many compliance things to deal with?
Yeah, I would say, so I feel like definitely we're very early right now with the journey. Sort of like, taking this small steps along the way, like VPN host checking, just sort of to get a baseline of how people are trying to get access to our infrastructure and what for, and what are the use cases. So this is sort of like the biggest area where we're investing time right now. So trying to understand use cases, it's always like people, projects, priorities, 3P.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's sort of like building a access matrix around this different surfaces. And when it comes to like more technical implementation side of things, well, there are definitely lots of interesting approaches these days, like reverse proxy, the whole sort of host checking idea, which is a little bit heavy on the client side and the user experience. So definitely something that we're taking into account when planning for rolling out specific solutions. And what else? I mean, definitely a lot of like smaller issues along the way. So making sure that people know where to report any troubles they have, and sort of like work around this. And provide some like upstream information to our help desk and site support, who is our like first line of sort of like getting to know what people are dealing with. Yeah,
that's extra important when it comes to productivity. One of the things that I love reading about the BeyondCorp papers is Google spent one paper kind of talking about the implications of this new kind of access model after the fact. And they found, I think it was like a 30% reduction in IT support tickets, because instead of getting locked out of the VPN and being like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, call IT, help, they were kind of led through this kind of really streamlined environment and says, hey, listen, we can't give you access to this resource because you need to go update your device. Here's a knowledge base article on how to go do that. And then people just stopped having to call IT, and it became like a huge boost in productivity, but also just made people more secure by default. And it wasn't like security training forced on them. It was just kind of built into their workflows on a day-to-day basis, and people became more comfortable, and they started to learn more about how they were personally more secure. And I love that when we talk about like Google's BeyondCorp and trying to bring that to other companies that are facing similar things. When you've got a large company, you've got ITs just responding to ticket after ticket after ticket, and a lot of it has to do with these kind of conflated security controls that people just don't understand. And the more you can kind of help them understand,
we don't expect them to understand.
Right? In an ideal world, they don't have to understand.
Exactly.
They just, they're just kind of, it's part of their day-to-day workflows. One of the things about that is So, you're changing kind of the controls. Like you're trying to learn as much as you can about your environment, so that you can kind of then take that into your next projects. So visibility obviously is a very important thing to you. What are the things you're kind of looking for right now that are kind of guiding you into, like, from a project to project perspective, that you can say, all right, I know more about this environment. I feel more comfortable kind of making this recommendation from a security perspective.
Yeah, so I feel like the sort of whole approach right now that we're taking, like a little bit more time on understanding the use cases, it definitely helped us out with identifying some interesting things that I think, like, personally I wasn't that much aware of, not dealing that much with, like, people in other organizations, like sales or user operations.
Right.
There are lots of interesting issues related to hardware, for instance, like, Mac Mini wouldn't have necessarily a very accessible USB slot, so requiring someone to use physical second factor, like YubiKeys, for instance, is a little bit of a trouble. We learned a couple of people actually don't even have machines issued by us, so they just work from, well, whatever device they got at home. Because I'm assuming that they do need to use a device, like,
right.
Especially that these are mostly remote workers who definitely need to access somehow the internal resources that we have. So lots of, like, interesting observations related to, like, hardware, like specific use cases, how people try to get to our network.
Yeah, that's a big one. So it sounds like you kind of have a managed device policy in place already. What does that kind of look like from, like, an employee perspective? Do I join the company, I'm issued my Yelp computer, and everything's inventoried?
So that's a very interesting question, because yes, we do have a policy. We are not enforcing it yet, though.
Aha! I refer to that as the adherence gap. Is it a written policy and enforcement in practice?
Exactly.
There's sometimes a gap there. Especially BYOD is the most common example of people just not adhering to the company policy. That's got to be hard for you from a security perspective. How would you respond? Let's say Steve found out somebody from marketing team. I'll pick on marketing because I'm in marketing. Someone on the marketing team was using an unissued company device to log into something sensitive.
So I think that the problem is right there, right? So, like, if they're able to log in there without any trouble, if you're doing something wrong on your side, and we fully understand that. There is obviously aspect of sort of like people, a lot of, like, issues related to just the way Yelp operated for the past 14 years. So just the sheer amount of, like, people working from various devices that they always were working from, and suddenly we impose something on them because it's more secure for whatever that means to us, and probably means something else to them. For them, it's usually just, like, complain about lost productivity, and obviously it sort of, like, trickles down up the managerial chain, and we have to figure it out somehow. So definitely spending a lot of time understanding how we can actually help them, rather than imposing something that will be sort of like making them less productive, I'd say.
Well, I appreciate you taking responsibility for that, because a lot of times people are afraid of security organizations, and they're going to get yelled at for doing the right thing when it wasn't really clear to them what they were doing wrong. And if you think about it from, like, a policy perspective, but then how you actually take that policy into practice and assume that responsibility, I think that just makes it a friendlier way to do things and kind of maintain levels of productivity, but also kind of support the backing security controls. So kudos to you for taking the responsibility on that. I'm sure it's a challenging job on a day-to-day basis. Now, let's say you go and you kind of implement new access controls and you rip out your VPNs. How would you have to go then roll that out to your entire company? Like, take that step by step, use case by use case, or would there be some kind of big rollout that you would foresee, training users on new controls?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, to be honest, like, we definitely are big fans of the rolled approach, like similar to what we did with the VPN host checking, where it was very, like, sort of like long process of both rolling it out, like, in different locations, different times, and providing some alternatives to unblock people in case we encountered any incident. Excuse me. So I feel like if we decide to definitely like lower the our sort of like how much we are actually relying on VPN to provide access to remote workers, that would be exactly in the similar fashion, because definitely we need to do it in the way that we are not blocking anyone,
Right.
and also not overwhelming help desk, for instance, with this like shifting the choice there for not using VPN and moving to something else.
Yeah, I feel like people would notice. Ryan from Quid was
Yeah.
very lucky that, hey,
Yeah.
nobody noticed. I think people
Yeah.
might notice in your environment. But yeah, I think this kind of phased rollout. Maybe pick some use cases. I think you mentioned
Yeah.
Jira is a good example. I mean, pick a couple web apps. Maybe start with some more technical users who can be familiar with these kind of controls that are in place, that might be able to understand what's happening behind the scenes, and kind of work your way from there. And then eventually, if you're get there, you can just rip out those VPNs
Yeah.
and have a
Yeah.
totally mobile remote workforce, being all productive.
Hopefully.
And then we'll bring you back on stage, and you can say mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we're getting close to our time here, but we have a few minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Kuba while we're here? Don't be shy. There you go.
So you mentioned that Jira was one of your applications which you moved out of VPN.
Sorry?
Jira was one of your applications you moved off of VPN. Is that what you said?
So we are currently in the process of moving Jira out of VPN. So currently it's only accessible to people who connect through VPN, because it's hosted locally in our data center. So this is our plan for next 3 months, I guess, to sort of give this possibility for people to move it outside without need to VPN in, basically.
What kind of challenges you face, and what is the plan you have, like how to do it?
So the biggest challenge is that we will need to change our DNS records, and at the same time open the firewall to Jira, like to enable these connections. So yeah, there is a little bit of like this technical sort of friction where we can't really do it like in silent mode. Like we'll like the phased rollout will be sort of visible from the outside perspective if someone's really like curious enough looking at what we are doing there. So as this is like our first project in that scope, if something goes wrong, like we're exposed like right there. So sort of like taking very careful approach, but yeah, like let's see how it will go. It's definitely on our like to-do list as like the next priority.
Are there plans to restrict the application only to Yelp issued devices, or start with user identity and then go to that step?
So this is tied into user identity, definitely, because there is this it's behind single sign-on. So there is this authentication part that we already incorporated with the use of single sign-on, which is also actually along the way, because Jira wasn't behind single sign-on before. And regarding the policy access, sort of like the device policies, I don't think we made any decisions yet. I think, at least to start with, it will be open to any device, but we may require some host checking. So let's say, if it's iPhone or Android, only like latest 2 operating system versions.
Right.
And for instance, like no Linux, because we know we don't issue Linux devices.
Makes sense. I'll actually follow up on that question. Were there properties of Jira itself as an application that you felt were conducive to this kind of new environment that made you choose that maybe first as first example?
Yeah. So it comes to basically how people are using these internal tools. So we we actually don't provide Jira for everyone at Yelp because, well, it doesn't make sense to, for instance, have
Right.
salesperson using Jira if they have other tool for that, right? So what we decided is whenever someone is requesting access to Jira, we will allow them to get it, and then obviously like the next thing they ask for is like, how can I use it on my mobile phone?
Right.
Because usually people from non-engineering teams, which often operate from like mobile phone on the road or,
Right.
or a plethora of other devices.
Product and project managers who were all over. Yeah.
So that was sort of the problem that we were trying to solve there.
Right.
Because the alternative was to give them VPN access, and
Sure.
we didn't want to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I mean, we see a lot of people pick the various Atlassian tools as kind of a starting point because they're enterprise kind of, but they're SaaS-y enough that they have this kind of cloud feel. But you start in, things like GitHub Enterprise is another example, or like Jenkins, or another kind of use cases that people feel like fit this model well. Some of the challenges get into, yes, opening up different ports and protocols. So supporting, like GitHub Enterprise, you got to support, logging in the dashboard, but then also SSH access and how you do a lot of that. So, again, pick the right tool for the job, but like I think looking at these kind of these various enterprise kind of SaaS applications that you're operating that kind of fit the model well is a good place to start. And Jira is one that we see a lot. Confluence Wiki as well, and things like that. Perfect. Good answer. Any other questions for Kuba while we are here? All right, I think we're at our 1 minute mark. 1 minute. Okay, well, Kuba, thank you so much for joining us here. You are rounding out the Q&A portion of our day, but let's thank Kuba first here. So we have one more session for the day. Let us take another 5 to 10 minute break. We're going to invite Robert from ScaleFT up. I'm going to not interview him. He's just going to go. But I encourage you to stick around because we're going to get into some really technical stuff. But first, before I close out, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. I hope you learned a lot. We do these community events to just share ideas and share thoughts. And again, talking to practitioners and just hearing the things that you're facing, what you're trying to do to solve it, and how we all can kind of support each other really just makes it worthwhile. And I'm glad we did it here and not in the craziness of the main event over at RSA. So thank you all for coming.